Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now today in front of me I've got a Celestian of the Sisters of Battle. Now these guys, to my mind, are some of the few that you can really argue to be the good guys in the Imperium. These are the ones responsible for maintaining the shrines and the far-flung, distant outposts of humanity. Alright, the Sisters of Battle are the ones who look out for them. They maintain pilgrimage routes. They look after all these shrines and smaller worlds, and in some cases, particularly where the Imperium starts to slip towards chaos, where local planetary defense forces have been infiltrated or outright turned to their cause, the Sisters can be the very last line of defense, and I think they're pretty cool. As well, these models are getting on now. This is their 21st birthday this year. It is a testament to Miss Jess Goodwin, who sculpted the majority of the original range, that they are still in use today. Now, the Sisters benefit from a little bit more sort of fiddling around and spending some time on them than some other species, like Imperial Guard or Tyranids, but we'll cover that now, see how we can get on, and go ahead and paint some. Now, before we get started on the painting, it's worth just a quick note on assembling metal models. If you're just getting started, one thing that's obvious is that you can't use plastic glue on them. They're not plastic. So super glue is what you're going to use to assemble these guys. As well, assembly and cleanup is generally pretty simple, but let's have a quick look at that. You'll occasionally get some... Oh, I've just pushed it off. Never mind. You'll occasionally get some that have these little bits of just sort of spare metal that comes through during the molding process. Particularly around boots and stuff like that, most models that have been done in metal will have something like this on them somewhere. So take a second to go around with your clippers and just snip them off as close as you can get to the main body of the figure. Then though, you'll find that you've probably got a fairly sort of rough piece there. And in particular, if you knock over a metal figure, anywhere that's got these little extruding bits is normally going to be the part where it'll hit the deck and the paint's going to chip off the quickest. So it pays to get a set of files. Now, a lot of companies do sort of hobby-specific files. I've got a set that I quite like from the Army Painter. In particular, I like this one that's got a flat side and then this sort of beveled edge on the other. Lets you get in some real nice spots. And it's exactly what you'd think. You're really just gently filing it flat. Don't go crazy with woodworking files or anything like that hasn't got a fine grade to them, because you'll just, tear up the detail. As another note, you might find, and it's quite hard to see on these particular figures, but if you have a seam, like you would on a plastic figure, where the two halves of the mold have met, and you have that slight line down one side of a figure, just the back of the file, and off it comes, the same as you would with a plastic figure. As a note, don't use your knife or any sort of scraping tools you've got for plastic models on your metal ones, because you will blunt them, and that's a terrible waste. So with assembly covered, let's look at the paints we're going to use. Now I'm going to do her black armor in the same way as I did the Black Templar in this video here on drybrushing Space Marines. So I'm going to start off first of all with a slightly heavier dry brush of Dark Reaper, and then Fenrisian Grey to sort of fake out the edge highlights along the parts of her armor like shoulder pads and knee pads and stuff like that. The Sisters have some really very well defined edges on their armor, so that dry brushing technique is actually going to work pretty well. Once we've got the base coats down for the armor, it's on to the red, what do they call them? Vestments. The cloth that she's got. Now, if you were going to do the earlier stages of the Order of our Martyred Lady, you just use this on the inside of the cloaks because the outsides are then black. But I'm doing mine post-Armaggedon, and they're going to be Mephiston red. Now, this is base coat, so it does go on pretty well, but straight over black, I'm probably going to need a couple of coats of Mephiston red to make sure that's even. Then we'll do the silver parts in lead belcher, and at the same time, here's a trick. Anything that's going to be white or gold, do it all in silver first. Now, gold going over silver is a nice and simple one, but because silver covers so well over black, it actually makes a really good base coat for something like Celestial Grey. So after the silver, all of the white areas will base coat with Celestial Grey over the top of that. Then Retributor armor for the gold areas, And then anything like her equipment, so pouches, holsters and what have you, we'll do in Dryad bark. So I've got here my Drybrush with a little bit of Dark Reaper on. We'll just get a look at how much I'm going to leave behind by drybrushing the edge of the base. And not very much, so that's not too bad. Now let's just go around and I'm going to sort of aim to catch where I want to sort of pretend as though the light is going to catch the most of. So along the edges of shoulder pads, sort of rounded edges on knee pads and what have you. But let's just go around now and we'll build up that colour. Probably need a couple of thin goes around. Okay, so you can probably see I've been fairly generous with the old Dark Reaper, but it's helped define some of the edges and some of the darker sort of rounded areas too. So what I've got now is my Fenrisian Grey, and I'm going to use this to really accentuate those points where I want to look a lot sharper. So along the edges of knee pads, for example, let's do along her shoulder pad, and just anywhere that you really want that, that bluish edge to really stand out. Now to start on her vestments, I've got my Mephiston Red and a small base brush. I quite like these because they keep quite a nice point while you're painting. So I'm just going to go around now and start blatting this in where I want her vestments to be red. And like I said, you'll probably need to come back over on some of these areas and give it a second coat of Mephiston Red. Now especially up around under where her bolter is, this can be a little bit fiddly, but take your time. And do make sure you get that. Don't worry too much if you hit the bolter, because we're going to paint that anyway. Now, particularly here on the back of her cape, you can see how that Mephiston Red covers pretty well, but it's not a perfect job. That's not a solid red yet. Now, it's tempting to just bucket a little bit more on the top straight away, but I'm going to leave this for about 5-10 minutes, let that first coat dry properly, so that when I put another coat over the top, that wetness isn't just going to lift off the stuff underneath. So let's give it a 5-minute wait and we'll see what happens when we put a little more on. There we go, that's starting to look a little more familiar now, that nice bright red. Now it's time to lay down the lead belcher on all of the silver areas, and like I mentioned, anywhere that's going to be gold or white as well. The one exception is don't paint all of her hair silver. That'll be a little bit more difficult to cover. Now, because this one's going to be a Celestian, when I come to do the gold, I'm going to do a fair bit of it. But just now, go around and any of those areas, get your lead belcher on. Now moving on to the Celestra Grey, I'm going to stick with my small base brush for most of this. But I will swap down to a small layer brush when I want to get something a little bit more precise done. Now you'll notice as well, I'm also getting into the face here. And that's because this is going to be quite a useful base coat for when I want to do the skin later on. So go around now, any of those areas you want to be white, bust out the Celestra Grey. Now the last thing we'll do before we go ahead with that first wash is all of the equipment. So I've got here my Dryad bark, and this is a nice simple one, just going in anywhere there's any leather pouches. And as well, one of the departures I like from the sort of official colour scheme is I quite like these gloves to be that dark brown leather as well. It adds a little bit to the colour scheme overall. It goes quite nicely with the red robes too. So I'm going to quickly blat in those with Dryad bark as well. So now most of our base coats are done. We've still got the gold and the skin to do, but we're going to do those after this stage. So what you've got now is bust out your shade brush and your Nuln Oil, and I mean, as you'd expect, just start going over the whole model. It doesn't matter too much if you do end up, for example, getting into her face there, but just go around now and go crazy with the Nuln Oil. It's going to shade in all of that armor and the white stuff as well. Oh, and the red. So with that Nuln Oil dried, we can see how much it's brought down a lot of the colours we've got there. Especially the bluey tint around the edges of the armour. That's made that a lot more, let's say, reasonable. But one of the things it has done too is darken down that red quite a bit. But that's kind of to our advantage. I briefly touched on layering just the other day, so that's exactly what we're going to do now. Anywhere that I want to brighten up, let's go from the back here, it's probably easier to show off. Anywhere that I want to brighten up that Mephiston red base coat, I'm now just going to go over with a little bit of it again, but leave that darkened down colour in the recesses where the wash has settled. Now this will be quite easy. You'll probably only need one coat of this, and you can go in and add as much or as little of it as you like. I tend to be quite generous at this stage because I really do want to bring up that red again. But just go around now, and anywhere that you want to brighten it up, get back onto your red. Now that looks much brighter, and it helps us introduce a little bit more of sort of the third dimension to some of those flatter areas where it might not necessarily show up ordinarily. So I'm pretty pleased with how that's come along. We'll do the same thing now with Dryad bark on the leather areas, and you don't need to be too precise with this. This is really just brightening up some of those areas that might have ended up quite dark after the wash. So just avoid in between fingers and what have you if you're doing the gloves this way, and you can do the same on any of your equipment pouches too. Now it's time for just a last couple of base coats, and that's going to be for our gold and our skin. So I've got here Retributor Armor, or Retributor Armor, however you pronounce it, and I'm going to go over any of the areas I want to be gold. Now because I'm painting this one here as a Celestian, she's going to have a little bit more gold detail on her than an ordinary battle sister would, so you can sort of stop when you fancy. But for the most part, let's just go around now, and good old gold bolter casing, that always spells trouble for bad guys. Let's get that gold base coat on now. So like I said, there is a fair bit of gold going on here for the Celestian. With your battle sisters, I'd probably skip out the gold bolter and these dealy boppers along the backpack. Just leave those in silver. Now, as for the skin, I'm going to base coat this over the Celestial Grey that we've washed with Kislev Flesh, and this might be a little fiddly. I'll try and get it so I can see what I'm doing, and you guys can see what I'm doing at the same time, but just now go in, get yourself a small layer brush, and take your time just to block in all of this skin. Now with those last base coats down, we're going to go to our Reikland Flesh shade. This works really well over gold if you want to go for a really warm, sort of, I guess, more sort of maintained and looked after. It's quite nice for a burnished sort of effect, depending on how you highlight it. But we're just going to go in here and add a little bit, again, using that medium layer brush. You don't want to go up to anything too big for this, because you want quite a bit of control where this goes. So hit around now, do all of your gold. Anywhere that's quite small, just dab it lightly. You know, this is really just to shift up the tone a little bit, make it look a little warmer. You don't have to worry too much if you're not getting it perfectly. And then once all the gold is done, in we go, and let's let's wash this skin. And you'll see how it very quickly brings it down to something a bit more reasonable. All right, now let's highlight that white. So get yourself a detail brush or small layer brush, whatever you got, and just a little bit of white. Start heading over the areas where you want to pick out and really accentuate how bright certain areas are. This can be a little fiddly, but just take your time, try to leave that shading intact, and you'll get a really nice pronounced white. For other areas like the fleur-de-lis, this can be a little easier if you just use the edge of your brush instead and drag it along. Helps if I actually have it in shot there. Drag it along the areas where you want that white to catch. Easy as that. And now to do a hair, we're actually going to overbrush most of it with white. So similar to dry brushing, except with just a little bit more left in your brush. And you want to use a fairly stiff brush for this. So a small base brush is a really good one for this. Or I've got one of my El Cheapo ones from the supermarket here. Anything which isn't going to spread out too much when you put a little bit of pressure onto it. Just go around now. You might find you need to go over a couple of times just to build up the firmness, I guess, of the white. Take your time, head around now. Just avoid that center part. Now we'll go back to Kislev Flesh just to bring her skin up a little again. So this time you want to just go over cheeks, nose, and around sort of her jaw, just to accentuate the shape of her face, while leaving that nice shading intact where all the wash is settled. And then we'll go to Stormhost Silver just to touch in along the edges of any of our silver details. So this is a good spot to clean up if you'd accidentally had any of the red go awry when you were layering that back up, like for example, just behind the bolter here. Shh, tell no one. Now in theory, we could stop there, but I'm actually quite enjoying myself, so I'm going to keep on going and really, go to town and enjoy painting her. These are some pretty old sculpts by now, but they do benefit from a little bit of extra attention paid. So I've got here my Liberated Gold, and I'm going to do a little quick edge highlight on all of these gold areas, just to bring them up and make them shine a little more. Now, you don't want to be too generous with this, because it can very quickly make your gold look brassy, even sort of chalky, depending on how far overboard you go with it. So try and be sparing, and just catch the edges of where you want this sort of gold to glow. Then we'll get some Flayed One flesh and just touch in nose, cheeks, and brow, just to really accentuate the high points of her face. And then last of all, what we'll get is a very extreme highlight of Evil Sun Scarlet along those red robes. Now you can be fairly sparing with this, because this is a fairly bright colour, but just to paint in the very edges will help really make it pop. And there we have it, one Celestian of the Order of our Martyred Lady, ready to take the fight to the enemies of the Imperium and punish those in the name of the Emperor. This was actually a lot of fun. I really like this as a battle, as I pointed out, and I think, with a little bit of extra work put in, they can look really smashing, even today. So what I'm going to do now is quickly Beppa varnish over the top of her, just to seal everything in, keep her safe while she's been, playing games with it, and then I'll get some photos once a base is on there. As ever, guys, you can get in touch, just drop a comment in the YouTube box below, or you can check me out on Facebook or on my Twitter thing. So, thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day.